can of Coke and Pepsi.
All right, we are going live. And we're live for another Tech Talks. Okay, let me rearrange some things on my screen real quick, and then we can get going. Because this week we wanted to talk about using AI as an accessibility tool. Because obviously we've done a lot about AI, the good, the bad, the ugly. There are many things that I have ethical problems and concerns about when it comes to using AI in different ways. But I can say one thing that excites me about AI is the potential for making many, many things more accessible. And we're just going to look at one way you can do that. But I kind of think of it as a proof of concept a little bit, because these tools are becoming more and more integrated in more and more places, like in Office 365. Now there's one built into Adobe Acrobat, so you can use AI to summarize PDF documents. And I think one potential benefit is, as these tools become more integrated into more places, they can do a lot of work in accessibility, in making content more available to more people. And I'll show you one example of what that looks like. So let me make sure I share the right screen, and I'm just going to jump right into it. Share this. Okay. So before we get into a web browser, I just have a folder here, and my folder has some images in it. Rearrange that so it's not so distracting. I've got some images. Most of these are just ones that I took with my not very good Android cell phone camera. So they're not even like very good images. But I wanted to start with this one right here. This is a picture that I took of a, Nick, what is this textbook? I don't even know what this textbook is.
That's an organic chemistry textbook that comes from.
Okay, so I was looking through, and I asked Nick, I need some good diagrams, complex images. He's like, oh, I have this organic chemistry textbook over here. So I was flipping through it, and I found some pictures, and I wanted to start with this one. It's a relatively simple diagram, right? There's not a lot to it, but this is not accessible. If somebody accesses this image on a publisher website or in Canvas, and they're using a screen reader, the screen reader is not going to know what to do with this. Best practice is for you to add alt text to any image you have in a web page, right? And the alt text would describe what the image is. Sometimes that's easy. You can say image of a cat, image of a field of wildflowers, just decorative images. But when we're talking about what are called complex images, images that have a lot of content and information in them, that it's conveying something, those are a lot more challenging to build alt text for. For one thing, if the alt text gets too long, then that's a problem in itself. But also, how do you convey the information from this image purely in text form? Now, you certainly can do it. It's not impossible, but it's time consuming, right? So here's where AI, I think, can be helpful. So I'm going to open up a web browser. I am using an AI model called Claude.ai. It works very similar to ChatGPT or Microsoft Copilot or Google Gemini. There are lots of these what are called large language models available right now, right? The reason I'm using Claude, there's a couple reasons. Because I tested this out in all of those different AI tools. And I found that the free version of Microsoft Copilot doesn't accept images right now. The paid version does, but you're probably not paying for it. You're probably relying on the free version. ChatGPT and Google Gemini, their free versions will accept images. But in my testing, I have found that they are not quite as accurate as Claude is. And they also have a couple other problems that maybe we'll have time to talk about a little bit later. So for now, I'm going with Claude. So I am in a Claude chat right now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add content. And I'm going to grab that graphic, that image, and then I'm uploading it, and then I'm telling Claude I don't know if I spelled that right. I did not spell that right. How do you spell analyze? Analyze.
Is Claude also free?
Claude, like all these tools, they have a free version and then they have a paid version. Right now I'm in the free version. You do have to either sign up with an account or log in with like a Google account or something, but it doesn't cost anything. So I'm using the free version right now. So I'm going to say analyze this image and analyze this image and create an accessible descriptive text version of the graphic. And then we're going to hit enter and we're going to see what it gives me. The image shows a block diagram illustrating the components of a glycerophospholipid, I don't know how to say that word, molecule. The diagram is organized vertically with branches extending to the right. Here's the breakdown. The left side says glycerol, and then it kind of makes a mistake here and it says abbreviated vertically as, and then it spells out the word. It's not an abbreviation, it's just showing that organizing the text vertically, and it doesn't quite understand what that means, but it did get that it's glycerol. And then it says in a pink purple box, which has 3 branches. Top branch connects to a green box labeled fatty acid. Middle branch connects to another green box labeled fatty acid. Bottom branch connects to a yellow box labeled phosphate, which in turn connects to a blue turquoise box labeled alcohol. The title word that I'm not going to try to say appears below the gut diagram, identifying this molecular structure. So that is an accurate description of what that image is showing. Is all that content extremely relevant? Well, the color of the boxes may have information embedded in that color, but in this case, I don't think it does. I think it's just for visual flair or visual organization. But the content here is accurate. And Nick, you were looking at this earlier because you know more about organic chemistry than I do. What do you think about this one?
Well, I won't claim to be an expert, but what I liked about it was also it's a starting off point. Like I could totally use that again with the edits that Caleb made. We don't need the abbreviated. We don't need the pink or purple descriptor of the boxes, but it does kind of in the alt text align the student to kind of how the thing is broken up. And then you might have context around that, which what I like about Claude is you'll notice that final paragraph, the diagram effectively shows a glycerol. Now I'm screwed it up. Glycerophospholipid composed of glycerol backbone, 2 fatty acid chains. Like that would be your figure description. So you could totally have that within the context. And you might adjust it to be more accurate or to, maybe there's something a student might commonly kind of get messed up on. But the great thing is it's giving you a bunch of options to kind of work from. And in some cases you might end up, I've got all this thing that's got all this description. Maybe it doesn't even end up being alt text. Your alt text is just that this is a decorative figure, then see the figure description, and then you put all of this in line, but it gives you everything, which is awesome. Because that's the hardest part is like trying to figure out where to start with some of this stuff. Like, yeah, I've got boxes. How do I describe the boxes? Well, it decides to talk about it as being branches, which may help somebody think through how things are related, which I really like.
I think that's a good way to think about it as a starting off point, because, and I'll show you a couple examples of this in a moment. You have to have some amount of content knowledge to be able to use this effectively, because I don't have content knowledge on organic chemistry or geology, as we'll see in a second. I don't have content knowledge on those things at a very high level, so I'm not a good judge of if it's telling me the important or the accurate pieces of that puzzle. But if you have the knowledge to assess that, to judge the accuracy of that content, then I think this is a really helpful tool. So this is a fairly simple one. Let's try a little bit more of a complex image. Let's try, let's do, I had another one here. Which one did I want to use? Let's try this one right here. This one is a geology diagram that I pulled out of a OER textbook. I think it actually comes from Wikimedia. This one has a transparent background, so it's hard to read all this, but when you upload it, that should be more visible. So I'm going to upload this one, and I'm going to see what it does. I'm just going to copy and paste my same prompt here. I'm going to reuse it. I'm going to attach that image, and we'll try another one of these. This image shows two different views of the Earth's layers, a circular cross-section labeled to scale and a larger cutaway wedge labeled not to scale that shows more detail. I like that because it does show that, but it's doing a really good job of describing what it's showing, which I thought was pretty impressive there. And then the layers from outside to inside are crust, and then it gives details, mantle, core, outer core, inner core. It says core is divided into two parts, which I think is pretty impressive. And then again, it gives you a little little descriptor at the end that may or may not be helpful. And I see Melanie's here, and as somebody who does know more about this content than I do, could I put you on the spot for just a second, Melanie, and see what you think about that one? Is that a relatively accurate description there, do you think?
I think so. I haven't gotten all the way down to the bottom of the bullet points yet, but from what I'm looking at so far, in the top part of the description, it's about halfway down.
Yeah. I think
we're
it's pretty good.
Yeah.
And again, you have to judge it as a content expert to say, is this telling me, is this saying what it needs to be saying? Is this conveying the information that I want my students to have access to? Is this an accurate alternative to the image or an accurate companion to the image in terms of accessibility? But I think that one's pretty good. So I was playing around and I thought, well, that's pretty good. What about just text? That's often a problem, and often a remediation problem for accessibility, right? We oftentimes have old scans or PDFs or something of text that is not machine readable and so not accessible. You can use what's called OCR, optical character recognition, that's built into Adobe Acrobat to try to make a machine readable version of the text. In my experience, it's not usually very good. Sometimes it is, but oftentimes the formatting is all garbled. It has a bunch of misspellings. It doesn't do a great job of that. So I thought, well, I wonder if Claude can do a better job of this. So I had another one in here. This is also from that organic chemistry textbook. So I'm going to upload this one. It's just an image of a little quiz at the end. Oh, not that. There we go. Production quiz. So it turns it into a text quiz. And I don't have time to look at it this time, but last time I looked at it, this was all completely accurate. It did a pretty good job of turning that into text. What's kind of crazy about this is I can also say, it'll also just take the quiz for you, which is a little alarming. Last time, this was also accurate information. So there's a dark side to this, right? If you're doing it in this way, your students could do the same thing. But as a way of using a tool like this to generate text from an image, it's pretty good. I'm gonna look at the chat real quick because I see some things in there.
Well, while you're doing that, like I like this because there's been a couple instances where we've had to move a on-ground paper lab online, and a lot of times it, depending on the lab, sometimes there's a digital version that we're printing off, but sometimes there's not, and there's a lot of remediation. Oh gosh, I'm gonna have to type all of that in manually to get into Canvas to meet a student need, which can kind of sour you on that experience. Like that's kind of our goal, meeting student needs and helping them achieve outcomes. But this kind of fast tracks you. And I also like, when you asked it to answer, it gave you answer explanations. You'd have to go through again and double check that everything is correct and it's accurate, also in the context of the quiz or exam or where you pulled it from, whichever text. Also keeping in mind licensing and copyright issues. Little disclaimer, but that's a cool element to also help us with building that language, right? Because gosh, you're building an exam or you're building some experience. It takes a long time to design that stuff. the extra layer of now I've got to do correct or incorrect answer explanations or distractor explanations, like that's time consuming. But if I can fast track it and give a student a better experience quickly, especially if it's like a practice exam that we need that extra feedback, but I don't necessarily want to spend that amount of time grading or giving feedback. Well, if it's an auto-graded practice experience and I can, oh my gosh, I can fast track a lot of really cool stuff. So my mind is just.
Yeah, well, and that's why we titled this session on the spot accessibility. It is that super immediate, just in time kind of remediation work that I think this can be really valuable for. Like you said, Nick, you have a old photocopied paper lab sheet and that's the only version of it you have, and suddenly you need to put it online. This could be a huge help with that and a huge time saver. But it's not perfect. So I wanted to show some examples that I was testing where it doesn't do such a good job. This is from a teaching and learning book, and it has a concept map here. And it's pretty complex, has a lot going on, a lot of arrows, a lot of lines. And I tried this one, and let's try that again and see what happens on this. So we're going to try it with this concept map. And it starts off kind of good. The central concept, organized knowledge, forms the hub of this concept map with multiple branches extending from it. Main branches, linking words. And we don't have time to look at all this, obviously, but you'll notice that this doesn't seem very large compared to the complexity of that image. And in my testing, it only catches about half of this concept map. It just kind of gives up halfway through and doesn't do the rest of it. It also misunderstands some of these linkages, and it doesn't totally understand the directions of the arrows. It certainly doesn't understand it conceptually. It can recognize the text, and it can try to identify these arrows, but it doesn't do a great job. This one it's not very good at.
Well, and something I might note on that, like there's a lot of information within that concept map. Like I think of concept maps as a way to, again, organize some information that has a hierarchy or connection, but it's to simplify or act as a, addition to some other content. Think of our kind of UDL, multiple means. Something like this will never truly be accessible. So you also have to consider, like, one, anything that it spits out for this, you can't make alt text. Alt text should hopefully be like 1 to 2 sentences, and we already kind of break the rules with like complex graphs and things like that. This is a conversation.
In the context of this book that this comes from, this is part of a chapter that really dives into this content, and then it includes this figure as part of that chapter. So the context matters. But this is an example where the AI is not very good at it. I'm not going to run all of these because I'm going to hit my free version of Claude limit if I keep putting in these really complicated things. But I had some other screenshots that I took. This one was interesting because my camera kind of goofed up and the flash didn't work, and it gave me a very dim, low contrast image. But it actually did a pretty good job on this one, if I remember correctly, Nick. I don't think it understood every aspect of this diagram, but it, again, gave a pretty good starting point.
And maybe something to note about it is it didn't describe, like it wasn't able to give the context, right? But you would do that outside of the image anyway. What it can do is describe what the image is of. Oh, we have these 3 diagrams of chemicals. Now, we want to make sure that the student knows that that's what these are. These are the 3 chemicals it's being shown. That could be enough alt text, especially if you had descriptions of what this interaction is around the image, right? So sometimes your accessibility isn't alt text, it's making sure they know what's there so that they know they're not missing something. And then in the actual line or paragraphs around it, you can use what Claude gives you as a starting point, but put that description there because every student would benefit from it, right? You don't want to hide it in the alt text if it's going to benefit everybody.
Yeah, this was another very complicated one from that organic chemistry, and it absolutely messed up the bed on this one. It had no idea what to do. It again kind of gave up halfway through and only got about half of this content. So this was definitely a challenging one. I think this is not like a great diagram in general, just because there's so much to it. This is not accessible to me as a student, I don't think, who doesn't need a screen reader or doesn't need the assistive technology. This is, I think, an overly complex diagram that maybe there's probably some alternatives to this anyway. But I am running out of time, so I did want to briefly include one other thing. The reason I wanted to do this in the first place is because I've been using this technique in our e-learning work, in that, you know, every quarter or so I make a comic, and the comics are complex images with a lot of text and a lot of content, and making alt text for this is really difficult. So what I have been doing the last couple of quarters is I use AI to make a transcript of this. So the alt text itself, I don't know if it's going to pop up, but the alt text just says e-learning comic transcript below. And then I'm using something from our previous Tech Talk, the details tag, which you can learn more about in our previous Tech Talk episode on the details tag if you want. But you can hide and show text with just a little button. And then I used ChatGPT at that time. Claude is better at it. To make a transcript of this, and it's a pretty good transcript. Again, it wasn't perfect. I had to make some modifications. And with ChatGPT specifically, it included some editorializing that I was not comfortable with. Do you want to? Is it okay if I? Okay. So for this image, it was describing us, and it said. In the image, in the original ChatGPT version, it said, Nick is wearing a colorful t-shirt and a friendly expression, and Caleb is wearing a t-shirt, and Cassie is wearing a hot pink blazer and a sassy expression. And I was like, oh, why did it call Cassie sassy, but it didn't say anything about us? So it seems like it had some bias there that is not super cool. I had a problem with that. So I've tested this in ChatGPT on a few different things, and it sometimes does that. It kind of inserts some editorialized bias on some of these descriptions in a little bit of a concerning way. In my testing, Claude has not done that, which is another reason I think that's maybe a little bit better model for this kind of work. But I thought that was interesting. And again, an issue of you can't just take the output at face value. You need to pay attention to what it's giving you. You need to judge it for accuracy and objectivity, and be careful about bias and inaccuracies. But I thought that was kind of interesting. Nonetheless, using the image analysis feature for transcripts and alt text has been very helpful and a time saver for me. And is there anything else I want to get to before we run out of time? I think that's pretty... Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, I just have a little plug. So I really like Claude, but I know it has limitations on how much you can put in there. With our Office 365 license, if you go to bing.com/chat, you can access, yes, the free version, but you can also sign in using your institutional email, and that should allow you to, you know, I think it's over on the far right, for example, should allow you to access our like essentially paid version. If you're already signed into Microsoft 365, you can access basically the paid version of Copilot, which also has some like data security things associated with it. And that's the one I use. So if you do find you're hitting roadblocks with other ones, this is what we have at the college and it works great, but it just
good. Nick, I couldn't figure out how to get into my pro version from here.
If you're already signed in to Microsoft 365 in the browser somewhere, like OneDrive or something, you can also access it using like the 3 dots over in the top left, or sorry, the 3x3 grid, like where you've got OneDrive and Outlook in your Microsoft 365. It'll be in here somewhere, I think under more apps. But point is, like, we have a Copilot version that we can use. So just something to note as well, because it's also has some like protected data features where anonymizes things, and anyway.
Yeah,
Thing to
If you still have a minute,
Yeah.
I'm just curious about the handwritten one.
Oh, yeah, you know what, we are technically out of time, so if anybody leaves, it won't hurt my feelings. But I did also take a picture of my own awful handwriting. It's terrible, my handwriting's bad, and I feel bad about it. I'm sorry for sharing that. But I did have some chicken scratches notes, and I did upload that one to Claude as well. And I can show you what it did for my really bad handwriting. And this is a terrible example because not only is my handwriting atrocious, but it's also on this dotted grid paper, which I think adds some visual noise. But even so, it did a mostly good job of transcribing my notes. Update and replace search advocate slide background design for all slides, finalize quizzes, rearrange questions, replace steps, timeline was, all that is accurate. That is what I wrote, as far as I can remember, looking at my own notes. That's pretty good. And if you have better handwriting than me, which is not a high bar, it will give you even more accurate examples. So it actually does pretty good on that too. Handwritten notes, it is getting better and better at.
I could just see like I have so many lesson plans that I wrote handwritten because like it helps me process it. But then having it typed would allow edits for future quarters
Yes.
easier.
Yes.
So I could see where that could be really handy.
Yep. And that could also be an accessibility tool for a student who maybe has like a note-taking accommodation. Sometimes, depending on what that accommodation looks like, sometimes DAS will pay another student to give them a copy of their notes. And if they're handwritten notes, that's still not super accessible for all students. So this could be an extra layer on top of that process in some cases.
And this
So I
could
thought
also,
that was pretty interesting.
no, okay. Hey, Caleb, it's me.
Yeah.
One thing that I noticed that would be really cool for this tool is for students with dysgraphia or fine motor control issues. This could be a way to kind of flip how we're thinking about it as a tool that we could use for making sure that we can see and understand student writing.
Ooh.
Interesting.
Yeah, it might be able to read the writing that I can't read.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, I think we'd have to test that out, but I think there's potential there for sure. The other thing that I think there's potential for that's not quite there is using these with a fully voiced interface. So for example, ChatGPT Pro, the Pro version of this, if you have the app installed on your phone, you can control it verbally and you can tell it, instead of typing in your prompt, you can tell it, look at this image and create a transcript for me. It can do that. But the voice integration is not perfect. So for example, I can't pick up my phone and point it at something and tell it, take a picture and then give me a transcript. There's there's intermediate steps that it can't automate yet.
Okay.
But it's getting there. That's something that they're working on. So I wouldn't be surprised if that becomes easier and easier going forward. Oh, Diamond has a great question though. Does anyone have concerns about putting student work into the AI? If we're talking about student note, I think that's a great point. One thing that I would note is Copilot, if you are signed into your CCS account, in Copilot, if you see this little shield icon here, it means it's using the enterprise data protection plan on this, which means any content that you enter in this is not saved or recorded anywhere. It is not fed back into the AI as training data. It is deleted and forgotten about as soon as you're done with the chat. So there is some level of protection there. That being said, I still don't know how comfortable I would be inputting student work, certainly not without their permission or knowledge. So I think that would be a conversation you would want to have with a student if it was kind of one of those unique situations. I think transparency is a big part of it. Said it before and I'll say it again, accommodations are a conversation, right? You can't make an assumption, you want to have it as a conversation with that student. It looks like Diamond is having, Diamond, we might want to have that conversation after the tech talk and see if we can get that part figured out for you. All right, thumbs up. Okay, we are past time, but I think that last part was really worth spending a couple minutes on. So thank you everybody for coming. So I'm gonna wrap this one up. We will see you, is it next week? Or Tuesday?
Next week.
We'll be talking about alternatives to Google Jamboard. The late great Google Jamboard, which many people used and liked, is no longer available. So we will talk about some alternatives. All right, thank you everybody for coming. I am gonna end our live stream.
Thanks, Al. It's good seeing you.